Hello, my friends. In today's video, we're going to talk about book layout and what you need to know in order to either do it yourself or work with a layout designer who does this professionally, and so you have an idea of what they're doing. But book layout is essentially a term that means that your book is going to look a certain way on the inside. When you think about a book, there is the actual words, there's the context, the substance, there's how those words look on the page, and then there's the cover, right? So kind of those three areas we have been diving into. We've spent a lot of time on the words, how they sound, how you put together your thoughts. And now that you've, at this point, if you're looking at layout and if you're looking at formatting, you have a finalized manuscript. So now you're looking at how they will appear on the page. There are a few different layers to this, and we want to kind of start unpeeling them here. So this is mainly going to apply to hard copy books, but some of this also applies to your ebooks, and it depends on where you're publishing, what publishing format or platform, I should say, you are working with. So they may have some specific requirements here. Otherwise, if you have more freedom, they don't have as strict of requirements. These are some things you can play with depending on your book and a few other key elements. So let's talk about that. This term book layout can sometimes be referred to in a couple different ways. You might hear it like book design, interior design, formatting. There's a few different terms that sound like they mean the same thing. Essentially, what we're talking here today is how the book looks on the page. It's not the cover. So when you hear cover design, that's specifically for the cover. Book design is for the inside of the book, on the pages you read. So let's talk about the basics that you need to know about this interior book design. The interior is the inside, and that's what we're focused on today. This is going to be very important for all of you DIYers out there. If you want to do this yourself, you need to understand what these terms are, what's important about them, and why. And again, if you decide to hire someone for this, it's going to be really helpful for you to have more effective conversations with them. When they ask you questions or when you provide them details, you will have some idea of what you're talking about and what they need from you. So there are essentially a few key elements to a book's layout, and this can vary from genre to genre. For example, a children's book with a lot of pictures is going to have something completely different than what we call a text-only book, not a textbook, but a text-only book, which is essentially what a memoir is. Very few or no interior images. Again, we're not talking about the cover, but there's not going to be any image files like graphs or photographs. Typically, you may choose to have some photographs, but the layout is going to be fairly similar whether you have 5 or 10 photographs or none, right? So this is kind of for those books that are text heavy, not cookbooks or children's books. So we are going to focus on the elements that matter for you and your memoir purposes. And the three elements that I want to talk about today are alignment, margins, and trim size. Okay, so let's start with alignment. Alignment really is twofold. It is going to be talking about the spacing and what they call grids. So let's jump into spacing here. Essentially, your spacing talks about how the words are close or far apart. So think about when you open up a Word document and you have left alignment. You have all those jagged edges on the other side of the page, and the words are very close together. They're not separated like they would be when you are justified. Justified alignment is where all of the lines are exactly the same length, really. Maybe not exactly, but they line up on both sides, left and right. That, for a reader's eyes, is the most cleanest. It's neat, it's pretty, it doesn't look chaotic with all of the jagged edges. We want that for your book, but here's the problem. You don't want to just jump into Microsoft Word and click on justification and roll with that, because you can really end up with some very awkward looking lines at some point. Imagine if you had a large word like justification and it was the last word on a line and you were just like short one letter, you just couldn't squeeze it on, it's going to be bumped to the next line. Then the line before it is just going to be spaced out, looking like there's 2, 3, 4 spaces in between each word. It's not visually going to be very appealing for your readers. They're going to be confused by that. They're going to be slowed down by it. It looks, it doesn't look enjoyable, especially when it varies from line to line. So what you really want to do is you want to try to emulate what design software does. There's specialized design software that understands kind of what the middle ground is. What is easiest on the eye is the justification, but how do we control the spaces between the words? What you need to do is hyphenation. So you've all read a book where there might be a word at the end of a line that's hyphenated. So the first half is on one line, the second half is on the beginning of the next. We are, very trained in reading words like this because even textbooks may have hyphenation in it. So we've been doing this since we were children. A lot of fiction books and, novels and all sorts of, traditionally published books out there will have this layout feature applied, hyphenation. But there is another little caveat here. You don't want to willy-nilly just throw on the hyphenation formatting option in Microsoft Word, because what can happen is that you will have hyphen, 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 hyphen. You don't want that string of hyphens, all at the end of line by line by line by line. That also is it's not an easy thing to read for readers. Sometimes it can be really tricky. Sometimes it's very smooth, but you want to minimize the amount of hyphens you use as well. So there's kind of a little middle ground. That's why this is a professional job. This is something that a professional book layout, someone trained in this will go through the entire book line by line and manually adjust this. And again, there is specialized design software is what I'm trying to say. We'll talk about that as well. I want to talk to you about some software that's available, but I want to start at the ground by talking about what it looks like to do this yourself, so you have a good idea on, really what the DIY approach involves. So the hyphenation is what you need in order to make your justified lines look pretty and nice and not all wonky and weird. But it does take some manual effort. You do need to go through the book carefully and make sure that the hyphenation and the justification are working hand in hand. The grid is what they refer to as grid, is essentially how the text lines up horizontally on the page. And it can be kind of tricky because I don't know if you've ever noticed this in books, but sometimes with physical books, even the printer can screw this up, where all of a sudden it's like a little turned, or it's a little, they can kind of screw up the grid. It's not something that you can necessarily plan for. So if you are getting physical copies, you want to, if you're doing like print on demand, you want to order an actual copy, like a test copy, before you do any type of mass printing. But it's essentially just making sure your text lines up horizontally from page to page. So you want the top of this page to line up the top of the next page, and bottom. So you're going to have to look into more on how to do that. But the printer also, no matter what you do on your end, can be a little bit of a factor in this one. So keep that in mind. If you are doing hard copies, get yourself a test copy. I like to do that anyway because my eyes see things differently on paper than they do on the screen. And there's just something about seeing an actual book laid out in an actual book form that helps you see what you need to fix. So that was alignment. Now we're going to move on to margins. And you should all have an idea of what margins are, but it's essentially just the white space around the text. And margins aren't just on the top and bottom, but they are also on the left and right side. you might hear the term gutter margins and, that type of thing. So let's talk about this. Essentially, you want your margins to be exactly the same throughout the book. And margins are, they serve a couple purposes. First of all, white space is very appealing to a reader's eyes. So having some evenly spaced white space is very nice and soothing and appealing for the reader. So there's a visual component here. But you also want to make sure that, especially when you're doing a hard copy, that there is enough space to where when the book is bound, right, and both pages meet in the middle, that there is enough white space there so that your words don't get tucked into the center there. So that is what we call a gutter margin. For standard book sizes, like a kind of standard size book, and we'll talk about book sizes, you want your margins to be about 1/2 inch around, top, bottom, left, right. But you also want your gutter margin to be adjusted to, and this, it depends on the size of your book, but it's going to be anywhere from like 0.7 to 0.9 inches. So what you have when you are working on a Word document is you have one page that is a little over this way and one page that's a little over this way. And they're called mirror gutters because they are the opposite for how your left page and your right page are going to look when they're stuck next to each other. You want the most space on the inside of the book. So Microsoft Word has features that allow you to set the margins how you need to, and a publishing platform like KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing through Amazon, they have specific guidelines, formatting guidelines, that they will walk you through exactly how your gutter margins should be set depending on the number of pages you have. So don't necessarily sweat about how you know what to set it at. Just understand that there are different types of margins that are required for your hard copy book. Now, even with an ebook, you're going to have margins applied. There may be different guidelines, and they may not even think margins matter much. Maybe they will automatically apply margins. But as a rule of thumb, set all of your margins to 1 inch or 1/2 inch for your ebook. It's just going to be easier for you to work on the document when they're all even and they're not different. But specifically for hard copy, this is important. When you're formatting your text for ebook distribution, your gutter margins can actually be thinner. They don't have to be wider, because there's no binding for your ebook. There's no reason for them to be bigger than your other margins. So go ahead and don't stress too much about that for an ebook. They can all be 0.5 inches around, 1/2 inch around. That's totally fine. Again, ebook readers will have tools that allow the readers to, when I say ebook readers, like the actual thing they read from, they can zoom in and zoom out, and they can fix things like this. So it's the standard formatting for an ebook is less strict, if you will, because you're not literally making it permanent on a page like you are for a hard copy book. So number 3, let's talk about trim size. This really only applies for the printed books. So if you're only doing ebook, this is kind of where you can say bye, Danielle, and come back for my next video. You're welcome to stay and listen, but trim size is really what we're talking about, is the size of your book. It's how wide you want your pages and how tall you want your pages, but it's within the size of your book that you want to make sure your trim size complements. So the guidelines for like KDP or whatever print-on-demand service you are going with will give you some more tools to figure out what a trim size for your book should be. But a standard trim size is 6 by 9 inches. You've probably heard that one. Or there's 5.5 by 8.5. And you're probably like, well, what are the, page numbers or word counts I should go with? There's really no magic number, but what you want is, you don't want a book that's too skinny, and you don't want a book that's too fat. You want a book that's kind of just right. If you look at your bookshelf, you can kind of see there's a common size throughout. My Ayn Rand books are about this thick, but she's special. She's writing a different type of book. But most 6x9s are going to be about 200 pages or something like that. So they kind of out there in the world, in the publishing industry, is a bit of a guidepost, if you will, for word count. So if you're looking for something, looking at writing something under like 100,000 words, probably go with maybe a 5.5 by 8.5. I think a 6x9 should work if it's not, too far under. If you're going something like 150,000 words, you're going to want something that is a little bit bigger, so it's not too thick. So there are guidelines there, and you want to just double check with your word count and what they might suggest on either the formatting guidelines or kind of in general for that type of book. But 6x9 is pretty common. That's a fairly common trim size for a memoir. I wouldn't say anything. A standard memoir is about 80,000 words, maybe up to 100, 120. So you can do like the 5.5 by 8.5 for something around 80,000. Excuse me. If it's over 100,000, really either size will work. But if it gets too big, you're going to want a 6x9. So those are the 3 elements I want you to think about when you think about the collection of your words on the page. In my next video, we are going to zoom in on some details. We are going to zoom in on what type of typography and stuff like that. How your letters look, how they actually appear, what size of font do you use? We're going to talk about headers and footers and all sorts of things. So please continue coming back if you are in the DIY mode of designing your own book. There are lots of things to learn. We're going to take this one deep dive at a time, and I want to hear what questions you have as we go.